Hello and welcome to a new episode of In the District. Today we're sitting down with New York City Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. Join us for a conversation on what are some of the pressing issues on the public advocate's radar, finding his way to his role, and much more. I'm Jonathan Calixto, and this program is brought to you from BronxNet's brand new media and technology studios in the South Bronx. Public Advocate, thank you for joining us today.
Peace and blessing, love and light to everybody. Thanks for having me, and I concur. This is an awesome space. It's a pretty dope space.
Oh, amazing. I'm so happy to hear that, first of all, because it is your first time taking a tour of this brand new space. With that, I know there are so many topics that we do want to get into today, but I do, for our viewers, want to get a chance to learn a little bit more about what is the role of a public advocate and what does it entail.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I usually ask people to ask me that so I can get into it. But there's 3 citywide elected officials, 4 if you count the Speaker of the City Council, who's elected by the City Council body. You have the Mayor, the Public Advocate, and the Comptroller. I let people know the kind of import, but I let them know who the last Public Advocate was, which was Tish James. She is the Attorney General now. Public Advocate before that is Bill de Blasio, the former mayor. And there's some charter mandated duties that the Public Advocate does. It acts as a ombudsman, a charter cop, making sure agencies are doing their job, following up on complaints from constituents. You have votes on the pension board. You get to appoint people to different committees and commissions. You can introduce legislation in the city council. One that's not in the charter is the bully pulpit. You get to lift up issues on a citywide level that are affecting constituents and affecting New Yorkers that may not be able to be lifted up.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about that citywide initiative and that reach in general, we definitely see that you have been on the headlines just as a voice for the people as well. So some of the topics I do want to jump into right away are, because these are top of mind for many New Yorkers, is starting out with the suspension of the Solitary Confinement Law. Now, there were a lot of misconceptions, and you did take to social media to kind of clarify what they were, but I'd love to give you a platform here to also just tell us what the misconceptions were, or clarify them for us, if anything.
Thank you for that. And it's been frustrating because we were hoping the administration would have stopped misinforming people, but they have not. This bill, in its first form, was around for many years. Shout out to former Councilman Danny Drum, who had the ban solitary bill. And then the current bill was in the works for about 2 years. And so we tried to negotiate for 2 years. And then we passed the bill thanks to the city council. Shout out to the city council. And overrode the bill actually with more votes than they did when they voted for it. And so it was voted for, which would have given the administration 90 days. They vetoed it, which gave them 60 days after we overrode it. All the bill simply says is that you cannot use prolonged isolation as a way to try to change behavior or punishment. And what we found that people more than less agree and understand now that prolonged isolation is damaging psychologically. It doesn't actually make the Rikers Island safer, and it's harmful. People who have experienced prolonged isolation, often called solitary, when they leave, they have a higher risk of overdose deaths, of suicide, and so it has a long-lasting effect. And so what we say is that we can no longer use prolonged isolation. You can separate. And so we ask that you create a separate unit. So when you need to separate people who may be a harm to themselves or to people who work there or who are housed there, we can do that. The one thing you can't do is prolonged isolation. Okay. And then they started making up things about you can't use restraints when you're transporting people to Rikers or within Rikers. All of that is simply untrue. The Board of Corrections promulgated rules so that they can start doing this. And instead of the administration trying to do this, they use another stall tactic and put forth an emergency declaration, state of emergency, which had never been done before for a bill.
Okay.
Now, just to be clear, there has been a state of emergency for Rikers for a while, and I wish the mayor had joined us years ago when we said this is a huge problem. Nobody's safe, either the detainees or the corrections officers who live in the same districts, the people who work there. Nobody's safe on Rikers Island. So what we're currently doing is not working, and if you want to do something new, we should create something new. And that's what we tried to do.
Well, thank you for that clarity. And it is important to note that it was suspended, a state of emergency call by our Mayor, Eric Adams. What is the status of the bill now?
Well, it's the law. But what we found with this mayor, this administration, this is not the first piece of legislation the council has passed and made into law. And they've just refused to either follow the law or find a way around it. Recently, there was a charter commission that was designed by the mayor But its intended purpose, many believe, was to not have a referendum that would go on in November, giving the council the ability to have advice and consent in some mayoral appointees. And the belief is the mayor didn't like that. And so he started a charter commission to put some referendum on the ballot to knock that out. And so they have a track record of trying to not allow the council to do their job and not follow the law once it's passed, and that's harmful for everyone. But again, I want to be clear, the state of emergency is not, in and of itself, is not a problem. It has been. So if the mayor had joined us years ago and saying this is a huge problem, that would be one thing. But the cynicism of waiting until a bill that bans prolonged isolation to pass the state of emergency is not a good look for this administration, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I know you have taken to social media to kind of share even firsthand people who have experience in talking about just this law in general. When you look at the goal for the law now, what does that look like? Is it still something trying to work with our mayor to kind of get this state of emergency out, or?
Well, I'm always happy to work with the mayor and administration if they want to actually come to the table. And so part of some of the frustration is that if it's something they disagree with, it's very hard to have engaged conversation of how to get it done. And so oftentimes we have to just do it without as much input as we would like. And so my hope is that they would stop this misinformation and actually come to the table so we can it's not like Rikers is safe right now. It's just not. And so what we are hoping is that, the mayor will come to a different conclusion. If not, my office is looking at what we can do if we have to sue. I know the council has, under the leadership of Speaker Adrian Adams, has passed some resolutions to try to see if we can be able to, if they've teed up legislation so they can sue as well. So we'll be working with them, trying to figure out which parts we can play, because everyone agrees. No one on Rikers Island has a death sentence. And I think people forget about that. And most people who are there are either serving very short sentences or they're actually awaiting trial. People don't realize 80% of people are just awaiting trial. And we know that sometimes things happen. You do need to separate people from a general population. We just said, just don't use prolonged isolation as the way to do it. And that should be something that we all agree on.
Yeah, well, we will definitely stay tuned, obviously, to what happens next. Something else that was also very top of mind for New Yorkers and was a very buzzing conversation this year was the congestion pricing. And I know on social media, again, you did take to talk about the importance of it, even quoting the hashtag of congestion pricing now. And there were a lot of conversations about how it would affect low-income families. And what is your response to that?
No, it's very interesting. There is a difference between where we are in 2024 and where we were in 2019 when this passed. It's just a lot of things have happened. But nothing has changed between when the governor was saying how great this is in another country, like saying this is going to be the best thing in the world, and then 3 weeks later having a complete 180. Nothing changed in those 3 weeks. There was no new information. And I've been supportive of congestion pricing since I was a council member. So this is about 10, 12 years. It was actually not that popular back then. But I was one of the ones who said, this is something we have to do. And I come from a car driving family, so I understand the importance of, particularly in parts of the city that don't have great transportation. But we have to, it's hard because sometimes people want to change things, they just don't want to change things, particularly if the change affects them. So they want to change to affect everybody else. And I understand it, it's human nature. But what we know is that particularly in Midtown Manhattan, but all over the city, congestion is just too much. People don't realize that they're the congestion, so they're looking at everybody else around them. But we have to get to a point where we're not having so much cars in a condensed time period and space like Midtown Manhattan. One, because it's just bad for everyone. We've seen a spike in deaths. You actually more likely to die by vehicular violence now than gun violence in the city, but both are really important things that we have to talk about. And we want to make sure we get funding for public transportation, which is the way that most people in the city get to and from work. And we want to have a planet for my kids and my kids' kids. And so we know that the climate, we've just had 4 days of the hottest days on planet Earth since they recorded temperature. Right. That just happened about a week or two ago. And so to get those things, we have to make some changes. And the misnomer about congestion pricing of who's going to affect. 95, 98% of the people who are traveling to work are low income, working class. they're using mass transit. They are not driving. So most of the folks from the Bronx don't drive into Midtown Manhattan on a daily basis. So they won't be the ones who are most impacted. But it does something to us when we hear something is going to change that used to be free.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes we just have to like, okay, understand, but you're likely not to be the most impacted. You know, if people are driving, most often there's a convenience there. It's nice to be in your car, you're driving, you're by yourself, you listen to music, what have you. Understand, but that there has to be some premium to that because we are trying to do those things that I spoke about. The other thing is I do think there were some issues with the plan. I definitely think there's some ways to make it better. But there is going to be no point that we try to institute congestion pricing that the people who are most impacted are not going to be vocal and push back. And so what I thought is, let's just get this thing started, and then let's be very vocal about tweaking it and making sure that we address the concerns as we go. You can't wait anymore. Now, if we want to, look at the pricing and look at how people and the fees, we should do that. But
so there is time for people to now. Obviously, it was halted by Governor Hochul.
Yes.
So are you saying that people do have a chance now to be a part of the conversation of what it could look like?
Well, yeah, we've always had that opportunity, and she's created more for the wrong reason. But the only thing I would say, whatever you are on the congestion pricing scale, the worst thing the governor could have done was spend years, tens of millions of dollars to say we're going to do something, and then change her mind. And so everyone should be angry about how that went down because it was a very big dereliction of leadership, in my opinion.
Yeah, and really quickly too, I did want to focus on this that did affect our community, especially in the Bronx, and it was that after this law was halted or this initiative was halted, there was a reduction in the services of bus routing from 5 to 10%. There was a lawsuit filed by yourself and TWU. The judge did side in your favor and said that we have to keep the bus routes until this case is resolved. Is this a concern for our Bronxites, for our communities, that there could be a reduction of service?
Absolutely. They had announced a reduction of service already. They announced certain capital plans that were going to be followed across the city, including the Bronx. But what we say is we can't do this reduction in service right now. This is in addition to some of the express bus reductions we're hearing about. Right. And then we found that those reductions were going to harm mostly Black and brown, immigrant, working class communities, and we said, no, you can't do that. And so we joined a lawsuit. Thankfully, we got an injunction, so services aren't going to be immediately cut. But that's the type of thing that we're going to impact because the governor says, we're not going to do this. I'm going to find the money somewhere else, but hasn't said where we're going to find the money. One of the things we are aware in the Bronx with congestion pricing, we do want to make sure that the air quality of increased traffic doesn't impact a community that has already been impacted. And so that's one of the things we do want to look at congestion pricing as it goes forward. I want to make sure we mention that.
Great, and I'm glad to hear that obviously the conversations continues. And thank you, Public Advocate, for diving deep into those topics, very top of mind for our New Yorkers, like I mentioned. And for our viewers, it's time to take a quick break, but our conversation with NYC Public Advocate is not over yet. Stay with us. Welcome back. Hope you are enjoying today's In the District conversation with the New York City Public Advocate, Jumaane Williams. Public Advocate, as we continue to talk about some of the buzzing topics, I know earlier we were talking about how crime in general, even gun violence in itself, how it stands in New York. And I do want to start off there with gun violence prevention. The NYPD announced that there was a citywide crime reduction in the past 6 months, sharing that there was a 4% drop And even as of June, they seized over 3,000 illegal guns. What is your take on, obviously, we still see the violence in our communities. What are we doing to fix that or address those issues?
I mean, this is interesting. One, we have to applaud a decline in crime, and so I think everybody can celebrate that. We have seen, and I thank members of the NYPD, I thank local community groups who have been working on gun violence prevention for a long time, crisis management system and others. And we also know across the nation, we've seen a drop in crime. Actually, we've seen a drop in violent crime across the nation that's even steeper than we've seen in New York City. And so we have to be careful of figuring out what's working, what's not working. And sometimes we tend to look at the numbers and assume a lot of things. So we want to make sure we're looking at it. We also know that people have a right to be safe and feel safe. Sometimes you are safe and you don't feel safe, and it really doesn't matter. We also know that data doesn't mean anything to you if you're the victim of crime. And so if we went down to one person who was killed or shot, that doesn't mean nothing because my family member, God forbid, was shot. And we have to be careful when we're having these conversations. So we're excited that it's going down. But we do want to make sure we're not going back to measures that we fought, which was the over-policing that we've seen. And sometimes I feel like we're trying to say, you know what, all we have to do is arrest the children of the people we arrested 20 years ago, and then everybody will be safe, particularly if we're arresting black and brown young people. And we found that that doesn't really work. And the best way is for you, law enforcement partners, who are human beings. When you call 911, it's a human being going to run to danger while many of us are running away. We want to make sure we're using them appropriately. And they're best used for acute problems, things that are happening right away. What we've been trying to do is trying to solve complex problems in the same communities for generations. And the communities now that we deem safe are not the communities that have the most law enforcement or the ones that send the most people to Rikers. Those communities look a certain way. They have access to safer quality housing. They have access to, believe it or not, social workers and nurses in their schools. They have access to more than just potato chips to feed their families. They have access to mental health support. That doesn't excuse behaviors that are causing harm in our streets. It just says, while we're talking about accountability, we have to figure out, well, what's going on in this community that's causing this behavior, and let's really work to change it. We had hoped that this administration was more on board than they seem to be now, and they seem to be sometimes reverting back, particularly when it comes to transparency and accountability around law enforcement, in a way that nobody really supports. And so we're hoping we can really move forward in the right direction. Like I said, the conversation around fear is amazing. Because you're actually more likely to be killed by a vehicle now, which is terrible, than by gun violence, which is way too high, and we can't pretend it's not there. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist. But if you look at the response to how do we deal with one versus vehicular, like you talk about vehicular violence and how we're going to change the behavior of cars, everybody goes wild. But with the gun violence, we want to allow a whole manner of harm to be done to communities that are stuck between real violence on the street and real over-policing to that violence. And so we need leadership that can help guide us through that.
And when you talk about even just that issue of public safety in general, we did mention a little bit earlier, but you did oppose the public safety charter revision. And I did want to know, with that opposition, there was a lot of concepts that were introduced even a decade prior, right? How can we still aim for that transparency in policing and all the other aspects?
Well, we should be holding everyone accountable. That's one, and myself included. I'm going to be quite honest. We have more leadership now, diversity in leadership, than we've ever had. We have more black and brown leadership than we've ever had in a city, state, and federal level. But I want to be clear, and I've always been, just having black and brown persons in these positions doesn't mean black and brown people are doing better. And so we have to make sure we don't confuse those things. And when we see ourselves in leadership, which we should, I'd rather diverse leadership than a non-diverse leadership. But I'd rather leadership that's actually making headway to the changes to impact the communities. Or else what's the point of us being there? And so if we're going backwards in things we fought for a long time, not just in the federal level, but right here in New York City, that's a problem. So that commission, while it had a lot of great people on it, was used for the wrong reason. And had we used the brain power there to really look at the charter and say, man, how can we make things a little better? It would have been so much more helpful and productive than what it was used for, which is really just to really shut down some of the powers of the city council, which is not what we want here. And we want to have an expansive conversation around public safety, not one that just says public safety is solely equal to NYPD. Everyone agrees that NYPD are answering calls they don't want to be answering. Wherever I go to in the city, I say, listen, who thinks crime is an issue? Everybody raise your hand. Who thinks that law enforcement are partners in there? Don't raise their hand. Who thinks law enforcement can do it by themselves? Almost no one raises their hand.
Wow.
Yet that last part is where we seem to fall, even though we do have the resources to make sure agencies have the resources they need and community groups have the resources they need, and we can create an infrastructure that helps our law enforcement out so we stop asking them to do the job so many other people have to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think you point out so many great things, especially too about one, holding people accountable, but also seeing the representation in our leadership. And with that, it does prompt me to this next question. With you being a former New York City council member, you are a Brooklyn College alumni, you are now public advocate.
You said the Brooklyn word in the Bronx.
I know, no beef here. But with that, you know, how did your journey kind of start in being this voice for the people and wanting to step into those roles?
Well, it's funny, acting is my first love. And so that was my plan, to be an amazing actor. And I have Tourette's syndrome, ADHD, but when I'm acting, my tics go away, so it's a very zen place for me. But social justice issues was always a big thing for me. My heroes were Spider-Man, X-Men, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They were all heroes, and they were things that people I looked up to. And as I got to Brooklyn College, I changed my major from theater to film production, actually, because the auditions that were going on were like crazy. I said, this is not the only thing I can do. I can make my own stories and show us in a better light. But then I got really involved in politics on the campus at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. Shout out to CUNY. And I really began to see the connection between politics and the work that I wanted to do. And I was a community organizer before Barack Obama. I tell folks, no one knew what it was then. My mother asked me to please get a real job, and I told her it was a real job. And I ended up running against an incumbent council member. The stars kind of lined up. I won, and I've been trying to cause as much trouble as possible since that time period. And I'm actually surprised that the style of politics that I have has helped me become a citywide elected official. I was told that wouldn't happen. I had to choose between being activist and elected official. I said, I don't think so. The best elected officials are activists. So we kept moving, and we wanted to show that you can be productive without being beholden to forces and ways of doing things that I don't think have helped as many people as we could have.
Yeah, and continuing on that focus too of being able to be a voice for the people, that representation. Obviously, this is an election year, and I would love to get your take on the importance of this election year and how people can use their voice and their power to vote for change.
Yeah, well, I don't know how political we can get here, but this past week or so, I don't know when this is going to air, but there's been some changes that have made people feel a little bit better. I've been walking around, folks got their head up like we got a shot here, we got a chance. So I think this is good. I will tell you I am a member of the Democratic Party. I also have some issues with that party because I think we've made some mistakes in pushing forward candidates that kind of still more mainstream, I guess, the type of candidates that are doing things that are not always helpful for most people. But at the same time, I'm very clear. I don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. And so I want to push my party to do better. I think that's a conversation we have to have after November because we have an existential threat that we all have to get out and support and make sure it doesn't get back into the office. But whomever you're voting for, I do have a preference. But whomever you're voting for, you got to get out and vote. Not just for the top of the ticket, but people always forget about the ticket below that. Because those are the folks that are going to impact you the most. And we want to be 100% certain that the people who are closest to us know us, know what we want to get done, and we often forget about that lower down ticket. And we really can't because they're the ones who probably affect you the most on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, you can get as political as you want here, and I'm glad to have your take on that.
Yeah, so you got to vote for No, I can't say who to vote for?
Fairly enough, I think. That's good. I think we got a good insight, though.
Okay,
I think we got a great insight, actually. But with that, I do want to bring it back then to your State of the People. You did mention it earlier, and I love the quote that you mentioned earlier, too, of every New Yorker is entitled to both be and feel safe, and many do not. You mentioned that in your State of the People this year. Where are we falling behind, and what is your goal moving forward to get us there?
Well, one, I think at some point facts will make a comeback in this country, and I hope to be a part of that. But when we look at, again, it's just very hard because numbers don't tell a whole story. And if you know someone who's been harmed or your family member, numbers mean nothing. But the numbers have been trending in the right direction for a very long time. And what we've seen, even unfortunately with this mayor, when he was running, we kind of made it worse than it was. And that's why he's having trouble, I believe, trying to regain the narrative because we fed a narrative that was full of fear. We have always been for actually quite some time, one of the safest big cities in the country. That's just a true statement. But there are people, particularly in elections, who don't want that narrative to be out. And so we have to get people fearful. So then once you do that, and I say I'm the only one that can protect you from you and whatever you fear, all kind of bad things happen. We've seen that throughout history. But we have to try to stop that. And we have to stop trying to get people's emotions to override their intelligence. And as I'm a part of the Democratic Party, and I think we fail here. We either pretend that the violence is not happening, or we adopt Republican-like talking points. Republicans are better at their own talking points, and their talking points don't really address the real public safety that people are looking for. So we have to be honest about where we are, and also recognize that people are hurting and people are afraid, and it's understandable and it's reasonable, and people are actually being harmed, and we want to recognize the harm that's going on, the violence that's going on, the shootings that are going on. We want to be able to put that in perspective, honor people's experience, and then put forth a plan that can address that. I really think that Bronxites and New Yorkers are ready for a leadership that's going to walk them through a public safety plan that they know and understand cannot just be law enforcement, but understand that law enforcement is needed. And so when you ask communities, they'll say, oh man, they're asking for more law enforcement. I say, yes, they've also asked you for more housing. They've also asked you for more programs in their school. They've also asked for mental health services. Why is it that you didn't hear those asks or fund them with the same kind of fervor that you do with the other thing? And so we have to have leaders that can have that conversation, because people are hurting and people are afraid, and we understand why. And so we have to stop abusing that fear and abusing that resilience and put forth a plan that really works.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned so many topics there that, again, could be another segment in itself, and I'm super grateful that you do touch on those. To wrap, also, I do want to know, when we talk about following up on what's happening, your initiatives moving forward to your goals, where can people stay up to date with your initiatives, follow you on your journey as well?
Oh, well, you can go to advocate.nyc.gov, and there are many ways to get in touch with us. We also have a text bot, so you can text the office. You can go on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and we post a lot on the office side, on my non-office social as well. And we usually keep things pretty up to date as much as possible, and ask folks to get involved where possible. Bronx is an amazing place. New York is an amazing place, and what makes it is the people. And so we have to give them opportunities to get their voices heard and their frustrations.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much, Public Advocate, for being here with us, for, again, just breaking down these topics, giving us a little bit more clarity, and continuing to be a voice for people and the issues that we have here. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on BronxNet.org and YouTube. While you're there, be sure to follow BronxNet on social media to find out who will be the next community leader we will sit down with on In the District. From BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx, I'm Jonathan Calixto. Talk soon.